Jacob was pursued by Laban and protected by God. Laban returned home, and Jacob headed to Canaan. He was no longer being chased by his nemesis of 20 years. Jacob could breathe a sigh of relief. Or could he? While on his way, the angels of God appeared to him. Remember, when he was going to Haran, angels of God appeared to him on a ladder. As he's going from Haran back to Canaan, angels of God appeared to him again. Here there's no dialogue. Last time God spoke, this time there's no dialogue. Jacob had just had his faith tested with Laban, and he's about to experience another test. And God is being gracious. He's reminding Jacob that no matter what you feel, you are not alone. I am with you. What an encouragement that is. And so Jacob exclaimed, "This is God's camp." He saw the angels of God. It's two camps, Jacob's camp and God's camp. They're together in one place. You know what's interesting? This place would later become a town. This is where David fled from his brother, or from his son Absalom, when Absalom tried to revolt and take the throne from David. This is a city that's on the border of Manasseh and Gad. This is a place that the Israelites should have looked at and known God's faithfulness. It should have been a reminder to them of how God is faithful and takes care of his people. It should have provided hope and assurance. But as so often, they failed to be reminded of God's faithfulness. Jacob knew that he had unfinished business. If he's going to return to Canaan, he had to face Esau. He didn't try to go home secretly. He didn't hope that Esau would just forget and leave him alone. Can you imagine if Jacob returned without addressing Esau, he would have spent the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, wondering if Esau would ever appear. Not only that, Jacob had wronged Esau by taking the blessing in the way that he did. It was rightfully Jacob's blessing, but the way Jacob went about it was wrong. And so he needed to make things right. And we learn a lot about Jacob here through his actions. See, so often as we talk about Jacob, we focus so much on the negatives that we can't see the redemption that has happened in his life. We can't see what God has done with him. But the post-Haran Jacob is a very different person than the pre-Haran Jacob. The 20 years that he had spent with Laban changed Jacob dramatically. And so Jacob wanted Esau to know that he was returning home. And so he extended an olive branch of peace. There had been no communication in 20 years. And the last Jacob heard, the last interaction, Esau vowed to kill him. And so he had to address the issue. So Jacob sent messengers ahead to Esau. The word here in verse 3, Jacob sent, is actually had sent. So this is something that he had done already, but we see it and understand that because Esau arrives very quickly. So it's not like Jacob could send messengers and then the next day Esau appears. This is a journey. And so Jacob, when he was leaving Haran, between that time and now, he had already sent the messengers. Jacob gave very specific instructions on what to say. Thus, verse 4, "Thus you shall say to my lord Esau, thus says your servant Jacob." You know, it's interesting that Jacob here gives much deference to Esau. He calls Esau my lord, and he calls himself Esau's servant. He gives Esau much deference. Remember, the Abrahamic covenant put Jacob over Esau. Esau was the one who would serve Jacob. But Jacob now is showing much less concern for what he had, for what he gained by deceiving Isaac. Again, it was from God, but the way Jacob went about it was wrong. Jacob now understood that the blessing comes from God and not from man. He didn't have to demand what was already his. God had promised it. He didn't have to say to Esau, hey, remember, you're to serve me. I'm going back to Canaan, but you have to serve me. Dad said so. He didn't say that. He didn't lord it over Esau. That wouldn't have helped anyway. But Jacob knew his place, and he trusted God with it. His experiences taught Jacob how to rest and trust in God, and it humbled him dramatically. So Jacob told Esau of the wealth that he had accumulated. Now, it's interesting. I want to pause for a moment because there's an interesting rabbinic teaching of this passage. So too often, ancient rabbis, they looked for symbolism in everything, way too much. But when you look at what Jacob says here, I have oxen and donkeys. So those are just animals that Jacob is talking about. But the rabbis taught that these were symbols of the two messiahs. See, ancient Judaism taught there would be two messiahs. There would be the suffering Messiah, and there would be the king Messiah, the royal Messiah. And so the rabbis taught here that the oxen are first, that would be the suffering Messiah, and the donkey, second, would be the royal Messiah, the ruling Messiah. The suffering Messiah would pave the way for the Messiah who would come and sit on David's throne. He would establish the kingdom again. And so while it reads way too much into this passage, and that absolutely has nothing to do with what this passage is about, I thought it was interesting to talk about because prior to Jesus, the rabbis knew that the Messiah would come and suffer and die. And when Jesus comes and suffers and dies, they reject him as a Messiah. They reject their own teaching because it didn't do what they wanted it to do. Jesus wasn't who they wanted him to be, and so they just completely disregarded all of their teaching. They disregarded what Scripture said about a suffering Messiah. See, we know that Jesus is the two Messiahs. He is the one who came and suffered and died, and he is also the one who will come back and reign on David's throne. But they reject it. All right, back to the passage. The servants come back. They met Esau. And he's coming to meet you with 400 men. Think of Paul Revere in his midnight ride. The British are coming, the British are coming. It's like they're coming back saying, Esau is coming. And he's got 400 men. There is a tension building in this passage that if we don't know how it ends, we should feel it. There is a severe tension. If this was a movie, the music would be getting intense. There would be a close-up on Jacob's face. He'd be starting to sweat. It would be intense. It's interesting that Moses left out the conversation with Esau and the servants. We don't know what Esau's intentions were any more than Jacob. But based on the last interaction, it's not a promising sign. The fact that he's coming with 400 men is an army, not an escort. Esau is coming to Jacob with an army. Remember, when Abraham fought the four kings, when he rescued Lot from the four kings, he had 318 men. So Esau's coming with a significantly larger force than Abraham had when he battled the four kings. This looked like Esau was preparing to fulfill his vow to kill Jacob. And so in response to the servant's report, Jacob divided his group into two camps. Now there's two. So if Esau attacked one, the other could get away. And in the past, this is probably where Jacob would have stopped. He would have devised this plan, and he would have just moved forward. But now things are different. Now Jacob prayed. See, remember when he arrived in Haran, he didn't pray at all. And that didn't turn out really well. It took 20 years for Jacob to learn what he had to learn. Now he has learned, and he prayed. starting in verse 9. O God of my father Abraham, the God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, return to your country and to your kindred, that I may do you good. I am not worthy of the least of all the deeds of the steadfast love and the faithfulness that you have shown your servant. For with only my staff I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become two camps. Please deliver me from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, that he may come back and attack me, the mothers with their children. But you said, I will surely do you good, and make your offspring as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. See in this prayer, he starts, God is the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob. God, we have a history. See, Jacob is confessing. His prayer starts with confession. Jacob had seen God do amazing things in his life. He multiplied him greatly. He protected him from Laban. He knew what God had done for Abraham, and he knew what God had done for Isaac, and he saw what God had done in his own life. God commanded Jacob to return to Canaan so God could do good to him. God, listen, Esau's coming at me with 400 men. You told me to return, and you promised that you would do me good. See, this is the foundation for Jacob's actions and the foundation for Jacob's prayer. But he doesn't stop there, does he? God is great and faithful, and Jacob is unworthy. See, Jacob understood the predicament that he was in was because of his own actions. God, you told me to return. I have to face Esau, who I treated poorly, who I offended, who I harmed. This is my own fault that I'm in this situation. God, I'm being obedient to you, but I have made a mess of the situation, and now I have to face the consequences of this. Yet, you told me to return. Everything Jacob had was given to him by God. God had been faithful. God had shown steadfast love. God had blessed him beyond belief. He crossed the Jordan with only a staff, and now he has two camps. Jacob is completely unworthy. God is gracious and God is faithful. Jacob's dependence on God was based on his experience with God and how God took care of him and his family, all the way back to Abraham and Isaac. But Jacob's prayer went from confession in verses 9 and 10 to supplication in 10 and 11 and 12. He's now asking God for something. After he humbled himself before God, he made a request. Please deliver me from the hand of my brother, the hand of Esau. The word deliver there is the idea of rescuing a victim. It's what David said in 1 Samuel 17:35 when he delivered a sheep from the mouth of a wild animal. Like this is the idea. Jacob is trapped. He is caught. Notice that Jacob also doubles up, my brother and Esau. So he says my brother and he says Esau. The way that this works in Hebrew is that it's an emphasis. He has no way out. Esau has surrounded me. It's kind of like he is surrounded on all sides by Esau. There's no way to get away. He is trapped. He is stuck. He expected Esau to attack and he could not escape. But the beautiful thing here is that it doesn't end here. The prayer does not end here. He had felt this before. Right? He has experienced this before. He just got away from Laban. But see in verse 12, but you. God, I am trapped. God, I have no way out, but you. It's a beautiful, beautiful word there. It should bring to your memory Ephesians 2, which says, and you were dead in your trespasses and sins in which you once walked, following the course of this world, following the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that is now at work in the sons of disobedience, among whom we all once lived in the passions of our flesh, carrying out the desires of the body and the mind, and were by nature children of wrath like the rest of mankind. But God. See, there are times when things seem helpless. There's times when we feel like we can't do anything. Remember these words. But God. Jacob remembered those words. This is where he was. God made promises. God told him to return to Canaan. I have nowhere to go but God. See, let us learn from Jacob's prayer. First, he humbly put himself before God. He reminded God of his promises to Jacob. In spite of his unworthiness, of Jacob's unworthiness, God was faithful. He rested in who God is, not in himself or his abilities. This is a huge change in Jacob's life. Jacob, like I so often do, I can get myself out of this. I got myself into this mess. I can get myself out of this mess. I have the ability to do whatever it is I think I can do. And when we do that, we don't rely on who God is. We don't rely on his graciousness. We don't rely on his power. We don't rely on who he is. This happens to me so often. I am reminded of this specifically even yesterday as I was doing a funeral that was a very difficult one. Spent so much time saying, God, I have no idea what even to say. God, I don't know where to go. I don't know how to do this. I don't know what's right. God, I need you to lead me. And there are other times where everything seems good, and it's like, well, I can do that. See, we are brought to these difficult times because in those times we are forced to rely on who God is. And so Jacob tells God, you told me to do this. See, he's not resting in himself or his own abilities. But he remembers that God was faithful to Abraham, that God was faithful to Isaac, and that God is faithful to him. See, parents, share stories of God's faithfulness with your kids. Tell them how God has brought you out of difficult circumstances, when God acted when nothing seemed possible. Grandparents, do the same thing with your grandkids. Remind them, tell them, show them how God has been so faithful in your life. When you do this, a couple things will happen. They will roll their eyes. Just know that they will roll their eyes. But they will also hear and remember, and one day they will hope and trust. Jacob rested in God and his promises to him. If Esau killed Jacob, God's promises would be unfulfilled. And this is the foundation of Jacob's prayer, God's promises. This is why we must read Scripture. We need to know what God's promises are so that we can pray accordingly, so that we can rest accordingly. We need to know his promises. Remember, God cannot be separated from his promises because his promises are according to his very character. When God makes a promise, it will happen because it is his very essence of who he is. He cannot make a promise that he doesn't fulfill. We can rest, we can trust. We may not know how it's going to work, but we can trust that it will. After Jacob's prayer, he set apart a gift for Esau. Now know that this isn't Jacob hedging his bets. This isn't Jacob saying, all right, I'm going to do this also, just in case God doesn't follow through. We've seen this before. We saw this with the striped branches. We pray and we act. We trust God and we act. We do things. Jacob's gift shows his vast wealth that he accumulated. 20 female goats, 200 female, 20 male, 200 ewes, 20 rams, 30 milking camels and their calves, so that's 60 camels, 40 cows, 10 bulls, 20 female and 10 male donkeys. This is 580 animals that Jacob is giving to Esau. That's a lot of animals. And these animals were all set apart by their type of animal, and they were set ahead, one by one group by one group. And Jacob's hope was that he would appease Esau. And so by sending the gifts ahead, Jacob ensured that the gifts would arrive before he did. And he would hopefully be able to tell Esau's disposition before he arrived. It's important to remember what the issue was between Jacob and Esau. Because Esau wanted the inheritance. He wanted wealth and possessions. He didn't care about the spiritual blessings. He wanted wealth. So Jacob hoped that his gifts would alleviate the tension between the two brothers. And the section ends here, and there's still tension in the air. He sent gifts ahead, and he stayed the night where he was, unsure of what would happen the next day. He was afraid of Esau and what he would do to Jacob and his family. He was returning to Canaan with similar emotions that he had when he left Canaan. He had gone full circle. He arrived with fear, and he is returning in fear. But this time he prayed. He's learned a lot. He experienced God's faithfulness. And yet he's still facing the consequences of his previous actions. See, forgiveness doesn't mean that we don't have to face consequences for our sin. We will, hear this, you will never be punished by God for your sin. You will never be punished by God for your sin because Jesus was punished in your place. Yet when we sin against others, there are repercussions that we have to deal with. And so Jacob was now finishing out the consequences of his deception of Isaac. But he knew that he could rest and trust in God's grace. In the 32 chapters of Genesis, we have seen God's grace from the moment Adam and Eve sinned in the garden. God has been gracious. I love in Exodus 33, Moses asked God to see his glory. And God said, you can't see all my glory and live. But then God says, Moses says, show me your glory. God says, I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and I will show mercy to whom I will show mercy. The graciousness and mercy of God is his very character. God, identify yourself. I am merciful and I am gracious. Let us rest in him. Let us rest in who he is, in his character. There is no better place to be. The world around you could be crumbling. And if you have Jesus, you have all you ever need. The world around you can seem amazing. If you don't have Jesus, you have nothing. Rest in him. No better place to be, no safer place. In spite of who we are, in spite of what we have done, God is faithful and he is merciful, and he is to be trusted.